Well, hello there, Hope Chapel. How's it going? Good. Yeah, thanks. Me too. So, as you know, the Hope Chapel board is in the process of deliberating how and when we open Hope Chapel up back towards a more normal service. And I was thinking about how this is going to be a really difficult conversation for them. And in an equal way, it's going to be a difficult thing for the congregation to find out because we're not going to all be on the same page. I know. People have differing opinions about things related to the corona, and differing opinions about how government should respond, differing opinions about how deadly the virus actually is. And I know that some people are going to find the board's decision too lax. I think that some people are going to find the board's decision too strict. And we're all going to have our own opinions, and that's okay. Actually, it's okay to have your own opinions. It's okay that we don't all think the same. Really, that is. What is important, though, is that in the midst of having a diversity of thought, which is okay, we need to watch the attitude of our hearts, which is not always okay. Now, here's a really good example, because this is a situation that is about life or death. Before God rained manna in the wilderness, there's this part of Exodus chapter 15 where Moses led the Israel from the Red Sea, and they went to the desert of Shur. We're in verse 22 of Exodus 15. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. Now, have you gone 3 desert days traveling around with no water before? You might start having the thought, I'm going to die. And that's a pretty legitimate thought, because going around in the wilderness without water does threaten your life. There is a strong sense in which you could die. And they came to Marah. They could not drink its water because it was bitter. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, what are we going to drink? And then in Exodus chapter 16, there was more grumbling. This time they were saying, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you've brought us out in the wilderness to starve this entire assembly to death. Were they being melodramatic? Maybe, but also you got to eat. So food and water are basic essentials. And it's not just for themselves. There were parents there with children. There were people with elderly relatives. There were people there that had a serious concern, like, hey, we're not drinking, we're not eating, we're going to die. And yet there was a sense in which the behavior was referred to as grumbling. And, sorry, there were some kids passing by. I don't know if you can still hear me. So in Exodus chapter 17, we read that at the Mount of Horeb, at the rock at Horeb, Moses struck a rock and water came out from it. All right, so Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? There were times in the wilderness period where they had serious, legitimate concerns, and yet there was still a sense in which they were being regarded as quarrelsome and testing because of the way they responded. Now, I don't know all the nuances of how the tone of voice, the word choice, how they were talking, but I do know this. Even if things can get all the way up to the level of life and death, there's still, even there, a challenge to you as an individual to not be a quarrelsome person, to not be testing the Lord in bitterness, and to restrict your behavior away from sin, as is the expectation in other times, even in our life and death. It's harder. We're all being pushed. We're all aggravated by the situation that we find ourselves in now. And yet, the challenge is still to not become a quarrelsome person. So here's the challenge for our specific church, although I would say this is a challenge for all churches. I doubt there are very many churches where literally everyone thinks the same way and they're all in lockstep. If that's happening out there, wow. How'd you do that? It's fine. I actually don't mind that we probably aren't all on the same page. It's good to think. It's good to have thoughts. But in a situation where the board's going to make a tough decision about how to go forward, my prayer, my hope, and my challenge to our specific church is to, in your independent thoughts, in your own hypothetical disagreements, to not do it quarrelsomely. Is that a word? I'm not confident that's a word. I am confident, though, that the Lord has grace for us, that God's Spirit can empower us to still be godly even in difficult times. And my challenge is, let's say you read the board's decision or you find out, like, hey, we're opening up, and it's sooner than you think is safe, and you're real upset. Communicate your disagreement in a godly way. Let's say we're opening up later than you think and is appropriate, and you think we should just be going forward ASAP. Let's open up everything back to normal. And the Hope Chapel board is too slow for you. Communicate your disagreement if you must. Just communicate it. But do it in a godly way without quarrelsomosity. Don't be quarrelsomocious about it, pretty much is what I'm saying. It's a challenge to us to consider the condition of our heart, because that is something that the Lord sees. That is the kind of thing that has eternal significance. And whether we open up a week too early, 2 weeks too early, 2 weeks too late for you, that kind of thing in the grand scheme of things is a blip on the radar, because what is your whole life but a breath? So I don't know if anything I said made sense here. I'm hoping all of it made sense, and I bless you. Thanks for watching. Bye.